Okay, guys, looks like we're all here. So, Levi the Christian Alpha, we have Rock and Roll Chuck joining us, and we have Osmium Zulu, three mods. Red Curious, it looks like he's not going to be here tonight. So, we're going to be talking about dating and social dynamics in Churchianity. Also, like, subscribe, turn that bell notification on, and comment down below if you guys have any other questions, and we will answer those in one of the upcoming episodes. So tonight we're going to be talking about first dating dynamics and social dynamics. Dating dynamics, I brought the question before we were getting ready to start the podcast, start recording. In my experience, I'm a single dude. When I go up and cold approach a girl in church, like legit, we're in the church building, it's after the sermon's over or before the sermon's over, I get this really weird response. Or most of the times, I should say, I've got really weird responses. Basically, I've got turned down more times than I've got a phone number or got a date. But when I'm outside the church and I cold approach a girl, in Costco or Fred Meyer or whatever, I get a much more positive response, and I get, a lot more of those cold approaches outside the church lead to dates. Even if those girls end up being Christian, it's really a weird phenomenon. And so I think that other guys are experiencing this. So we're going to talk about that. And I was just asking these guys, Rock and Roll Chuck and Oz, for feedback on what they thought, if I was giving off a weird vibe, or is it just Churchianity culture? And Chuck had a really good response, and then Oz was going to respond. So Chuck, what's your feedback so far?
I think it has to do with the high expectations that girls have in the church. They've all been told they're daughters of the king. They've all been told to not settle for anything but the absolute best. They're basically looking for the myth of the submissive alpha male. They're not going to settle for anything less than the born again Brad Pitt or whoever you want to call him these days. Their standards are, in most cases, so high that you could be a perfect 10, your walk could be on point, you could be running a ministry, you could be loaded, and in many cases, you would still get turned down because their standards are higher than that. And I think it's unrealistic in many cases. I don't think they're all like that, but I've definitely seen that attitude more and more in churches when it comes to women in general.
See, I think there may be some of that, but I think what we may be running into is a contextual situation, and it has expectations. So if you were to approach these women at a workplace as a coworker, you would probably get similar sort of responses. Whereas if you were to approach the same woman and she's not your coworker out at the park or something, you would probably get a much more favorable response because you have a parallel culture to the normal culture, and it has certain contextual expectations of how people ought to behave and certain risks associated with positive response. So at work, if you positively respond to a coworker coming on to you, you could get into all kinds of weird social dynamics, could jeopardize your job, etc. And at church, I think women feel similarly in that, they may be seen differently. They may be seen as, somebody who's just giving their number out willy-nilly or whatever. And so I think that there's a higher social cost to responding to that. And I think there's a lower expectation for something like that to happen. Similarly, most women most professional jobs at least are not expecting a guy to ask for their number. Whereas that same girl at a party is much more likely to give out her number because that's part of the expectation of that cultural context. And so I think that there's a degree of that happening, which is just normal. And then I think as you enter into a church and you look around and you get a sense of the culture of that church, the more closely it relates and appears to be kind of congruent with secular mainstream culture, the more likely you are to get favorable responses. There are a few mega churches in my area that I'm certain if you were to go there and cold approach a woman, it would be no different than if you went down to a park because there is no parallel culture there. Whereas at the church that I attend and a few others, it's definitely more of a sectarian culture.
Yeah, that reminds me, I have a friend, and I've talked to this girl, she goes to a decent sized church. Can't remember how big the church is, but it's decent size. And she's if I'm recalling correctly, there's no guys she's found that she's like really attracted to there. But I notice with her and with other girls that there's more attraction for guys that aren't Christians than that are Christians. And maybe it's because, like you're saying, there's a little bit of context there. Not many Christian guys are approaching her outside of the church context. And so since she's surrounded by more secular guys in, just everyday life, that's what's kind of, that's what's attracting her. Not that she's attracted to secular dudes, but that there's more secular dudes outside the church context.
Well, I think to a large degree, there's an expectation coming from the media. You look at any kind of dating, movie, rom-com, whatever else, the girl never goes to church and finds the guy. She never finds the hunk there. That would be like totally antithetical to this wild leftist agenda being pressed by our media, right? So she always finds the hot guy in unexpected places, out and about and doing their thing. And so women are programmed to look elsewhere than church, I think, for the guy that turns them on. And so I think it does come out as a surprise when there is a guy at church who approaches them, even if he is attractive, it still is breaking that programmed expectation of what guys in that context ought to look like. Not to mention, if you look at not just the media portrayal of Christians, but if you look at actual Christian guys, it should come as no surprise that most of them are not panty droppers. Most of them are not exactly the most suave guys who are going to generate that response anyways. So I think, again, back to the idea of expectations, I think a lot of women in church just do not expect to find a guy there that they're going to be overly attracted to. Not to mention, a lot of the attractive guys at a church tend to be married off already anyways. And so there's kind of this weird dynamic that can happen there as well.
Yeah. So then I guess the strategy. So my strategy for, I guess, just finding girls to date or plates or whatever, is just continue about everyday life, do activities, things that are enjoyable, kind of what's been echoed in RPC, but it's increasing my chances of finding a girl that's Christian while still like cold approaching outside of the church is you're just fishing in a pond, a small pond, or maybe not a small pond, a big pond with not that many Christian fish in there. So with that in mind, what advice would you guys give for other dudes that are in a similar situation as I am? And I'm also not into the online dating apps. It's not that I can't. I'm very tech savvy. I just don't like online dating apps because it doesn't give you a chance to show your personality. You're just another statistic.
Yeah, that's true. Not only that, but while you might find a quality woman on a dating app, you might find a quality woman at a bar too, but it's not very likely. So there's a reason Tinder is for hookups. It's not for finding a wife. People have, it's not completely out of the question, but most people don't say, I'm going to go on Tinder and find a good wife, somebody that's really going to love me and cherish me all my life. Yeah, no, that's not the purpose of Tinder. And so I will just say to our audience out there, if that's where you're looking for quality women, don't be surprised if you're not finding people that meet those expectations. Honestly, you're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah, and I think just, if we're going to just assume on the outset here that it is part of your mission, a wife is included in that you're in a position where you can sustain that type of relationship, you've got your crap figured out, and you're, a worthwhile catch, and you actually have some value to present, then, there is a real question. It's okay, if you're a Christian guy, where do you go looking? And I think that's a tough question in many ways to answer, because the Christian church in the West is not a monolith, right? If you go to 10 congregations, you're going to find some similarities, but there are definitely different congregational and denominational differences that are going to influence the type of expectations culturally you're going to find in that church. So again, if you're going to some sort of mega church or Pentecostal church, something that's, more on the, Anabaptist bent theologically, you're much more likely to have positive, receptive, moments when it comes to cold approaching or just getting to meet people that way, because I think that it tends to produce a culture where that kind of mingling just happens. If you go to a Reformed church, and I'll pick on my own denominational kind of bent here for a minute, there's a great seriousness to a lot of it, and what that does is it does produce a lot of people who are serious about their faith, and you're more likely, I think, to find a woman who gets it, has a good relationship with God, has a good theological basis to start with. That all said, it's a much tougher ice to break to begin with, and so your strategy in those type of different situations is going to have to be adaptable. And this is something where I think RPC really has not done any sort of significant groundwork in helping guys who are single break that ice and figure out what are the strategies that work specifically for Christians. Because yeah, there's going to be some obvious, red pill truths are pretty universal, but marketing still matters. How you get those across matters, in the same way that you're going to pick up a girl differently if you're, a secular RP guy in the club differently than you are at your office job. You have to be able to adapt to those things. So I think part of the question is, do you know your own cultural context or where you're looking? And your approach is going to have to be tailored to that to a certain degree.
Well, let me ask you guys this. If we're talking just about dating in general, and we're not talking about, dating in the church for Christians per se, we take a lot of red pill ideas and we look at the Bible and we say, yeah, these fit well with what Scripture says anyway. How do we look at dating the same way for singles? How do we look at it and say, if you weren't a Christian, what kind of things would you be doing? Obviously, you don't want to cross boundaries that God has set. We want to do it within a Christian framework, but what kind of things would a secular person be doing that would fit with what Christians would do?
Yeah, I think that there's value in that. I mean, I would certainly advocate people have a good understanding of just red pill theory, game, all the rest of it. But I do think that there's a contextualization that is unique to the RPC audience, because sure, yeah, if you look at casting a wide net, you're able to do that if you have no other convictions, right? If you have your laundry list of these are kind of my main criteria that I'm looking for in somebody to date, that's going to be pretty broad. But when you start tacking on more of these things, where it comes down to, Christian, whatever, you start adding on those things, you're narrowing the pool and you're narrowing the circumstances and where you might find this person. And it's not exactly unicorn hunting, but I think that there are uniquely Christian elements to it that are, really worth exploring for the benefit of our audience. And so, for example, if you're in a more right-leaning conservative church, I wouldn't think that Sunday morning is a time to cold approach. Certainly if the context warrants it, it doesn't hurt to be friendly. But I think that one guy walking up and approaching and opening a set of women is going to be perceived weirdly. And you don't want to, and I've seen guys do this, otherwise attractive guys do this, where they got the reputation as like, oh yeah, that's the thirsty guy who always meets all the girls every Sunday morning. And if there's a new pretty one that comes in, it's like 5 minutes after the sermon, he's already talking to her. And that can blow your reputation pretty quick and make you look really thirsty. Whereas, again, if you're in a more, less conservative church, that may be totally fine because it's pretty well part of the cultural expectation. So this is getting into the second part of the thing we're going to talk about a little bit, but what are the social dynamics involved in church in general? And how do you break up cliques? How do you form your own, group of people that you want to associate with? How do you, be able to be socially influential in your church for positive reasons? And I think all of those type of things are going to really help you if you are looking for, a Christian woman in a church. If you are, you're going to be leaning a lot on social proof, for example. So if you're a guy who has a lot going on, if you are a guy who is known by most of the people in the church, especially the guys, and you have demonstrated, value there, and that you get the respect from the guys, women are going to notice that. They're going to be looking around anywhere else. Just like in church, they're going to be looking around and saying, okay, who's the leader of the pack, basically. And so if you position yourself where you're serving in the church, you're well thought of, the guys, their wives, some of the women in the church, and they think positively of you and speak positively of you, word gets around pretty quickly.
Yeah, so that seems to be the difference between like a long game and a short game. Short game being the just go up, approach, cold approach. That was me like 2 or 3 churches ago. First church I got saved in, I was the guy who was like, cute girl, boom, gonna go get your number, sucker. And then the long game approach would be, building your sphere of influence. And I like, there's this post I recall from, I think it's Set It, the seduction subreddit, and it was about approaching girls in the gym. And if you could be the guy that's just friendly and talking to everybody, it'll seem like there's context for getting to know a cute girl in the gym. And I've done this before where I am the social guy in the gym, and then when I go up and say hi to a new person, whether it be a guy or a girl, I have context because I say, hey, I've seen you a few times and I don't know you yet. I know a lot of other people here. What's your name? So you're creating that context, and social proof helps when you're able to say hi to a bunch of people at the church. But it's kind of difficult for, I guess, maybe I'll let one of you guys speak now.
Well, I think that the differentiation between short-term and long-term game here is actually really helpful, because I think that the short game doesn't go over super well in a church. Like, if you think about the shortest game would be you go to a new church that you've never been to before and you start approaching the attractive women there. Not only are you going to get pushback from probably the women, but probably the guys too, because there's a ton of mate guarding that happens. And so now you're getting in a situation where you're going to be having to like mog on dudes, and it just gets really weird quickly. And so I think that the longer game tends to play out better in a church context. And I think that you can kind of set yourself up with some contextual helping points. So, like, for example, when I was at the point where I was single and I had met my wife, but we weren't dating yet, I was leading a Bible study group, and it was pretty well known that it was kind of like the young adults group in the church. And so when I approached a girl and invited her, it wasn't weird, and it was inviting to something it was a low ask. The higher the ask, something like give me your number, that's going to be perceived a certain way. And it's not, there's nothing wrong with it. It may totally work out if it's contextually relevant, but again, it's like overcoming that conservative stake where it's like, what am I committing myself to here? Saying, will you come to a Bible study and hang out? That's a much lower ask. And so you're much more likely to yes. And that then puts you in a context where you can get to know the person, get to know the girl in a lower stakes environment. And so, setting yourself up where you have interesting things going on. It doesn't have to be a Bible study. It can be whatever. But if you have interesting things going on, your logistics are better to be able to invite her along to those things. And especially if there's other people, that in the church involved with it, you're much more likely to get a positive response. And I think really kind of the key is be able to, if you meet them on Sunday morning, what else do you have going on either that afternoon or that week where you can invite them along and get them out of that high pressure context.
But if you get them into that lower pressure context, how much of a risk is there of being in the friend zone? And how do you mitigate that?
I don't know. Are you hot?
And I guess go ahead.
I was going to say, it seems simple, but the reality is, I don't think women are getting approached on Sunday morning by an attractive guy and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to give him my number. He might like me or something. I just want to be friends with that guy. No, I just think that you're still likely to receive some of these cultural taboo sort of barriers. Christians are very good about, policing those sort of things, especially among young women. And so there are some real contextual barriers to get over when it comes to these taboos. And I think that, you're much less likely to end up in a friend zone in that case if they think, oh, well, this really cute guy at church, yeah, he invited me to this. I don't know if he was hitting on me. He's attractive, but he invited me to this thing that's okay to go to, and I'm not going to lose any face with my female friends or mentors or parents or whatever else, because I'm just going to go hang out with these other guys. It seems childish and dumb, but that's the reality of the context. And so do I wish it was otherwise? Yeah, but I think that's the reality that a lot of guys are working with, is that barrier tends to be really strong. And so she's got to save face with her friends. So if she's giving her number out to just random cute guys that approach her, that's going to make her look like a hoe, even though, compared to a lot of the secular world, that's seen as so benign and right, fine, I get that. But in the Christian world, especially in the conservative end of it, where a lot of our users are from, a lot of our community is more on that conservative church bent, they're still having to be aware of those taboos and navigate around those. Because if you put her in a position where if she says yes, it's going to make her lose face with her friends, she's probably not going to say yes. If you put her in a position where saying yes makes her, either neutral or even look better, you're much more likely to get a favorable response. And so I think it's to be attractive, don't be unattractive. Yeah, if you're some spurty, weird dude and you invite her to a Bible study and she goes, yeah, you're still probably gonna end up in the friend zone, but that doesn't change just because of your approach. You would have ended up there anyways.
Well, I would say most of our younger male audience is probably working on being more attractive and less unattractive. But for those that may not have quite gotten there yet and are still working towards it, I think this is something that I do see come up kind of indirectly in a lot of posts, a lot of questions, a lot of comments. They know how to get the girls' attention. They know how to invite them somewhere. Once they get there, they always end up in the friend zone. And I think that's really frustrating for them. So once they get them out of the high pressure environment into that lower pressure environment, what do you guys see as the next step towards success? Obviously, they're either attracted or they're not. But if it's kind of in the middle, if the guy is somewhat attractive and hey, maybe there's a spark there, a lot of times that guy ends up in the friend zone because of something he does or something he doesn't do. So what would be the advice? What should he do differently if he finds himself in the friend zone all the time? Because I think a lot of guys out there struggle with this, especially in a Christian context.
I think.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think a lot of the first, the window of attraction I found is a very slim window. So if you're not to some degree overt, at least openly flirtatious with your interactions with that girl, whether it's in the context of inviting her to this like game night worship night, or it's at the game night worship night, you probably like flirting with her, making your intentions clear through your body language, your tone of voice, what you say, things like that. And then if she's seeing how receptive she is, you could go for the ask if she's not receptive. I have had dates that have happened from that, but I've got a lot more dates asking for numbers with girls that are giving me positive indicators of interest back, are flirting with me back. So I'd say after you're in it a game night or two, maybe 3 at the most, in the context of that window of attraction is really slim. Just building a connection with that person, flirting, and then going for the ask, hey, cool. It'd be cool to hang out with you outside of this. I'm going to the gym tomorrow. You want to come or whatever? That's my advice. What do you guys think? I think that would set you. I think that you'd either be in the friend zone or not after that. There's no in between. And I personally hate not knowing. So I usually polarize to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm in the friend zone or I'm not in the friend zone, and I move on.
So it sounds like what you're saying is at some point that guy's going to have to take a risk and risk being rejected. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. Obviously, that's something people have to work on. But for anybody listening that does struggle with this, yeah, you're going to have to take a risk at some point. I think guys just want things to magically happen like they see in the movies because they don't have any confidence and they don't want to risk rejection. But life is about rejection. Life is about taking chances, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And so what Levi here is saying is at some point you're going to have to go overt, and you're going to have to make it clear that you're interested, and she's either going to be interested or you're going to get shot down, and you're just going to have to take that approach and go with it and see what happens. And it's going to take practice and calibration, right, Levi?
Yeah, I would encourage any guy listening to this to, every time you see a cute girl in a store or everyday context, probably not at work, go approach her, ask her for a number, flirt with her, whatever. Get used to taking that risk and accepting the rejection. There was a girl at Costco 2 nights ago, and we had a great conversation. Turns out she was married, so she was wearing gloves. I didn't see the ring there, or I wouldn't have even bothered. But sometimes you get a great flirty conversation and you get a number. Sometimes you get some girl looking at you like, ew, why would you even ask me that? Like, don't talk to me. Like, I've got that too. Like, same place, different girls, same approach, same me. Like, yeah, it's just, you can never know. And so that's where you have to take the risk and just grow some balls. Honestly, with that girl at Costco, I did leave. I started to go to my vehicle before I decided to turn around. I was like, dang, I wanted to ask her for a number. And I turned around and I was like, I went back to her and I was like, hey, like, I'm literally just wanted to come back and say hi to you and like ask you like, hey, are you single? I didn't say it exactly like that, but she's like, oh, thank you. I have a husband. And I was like, shoot. So,
So I think you guys are a couple steps ahead here, because I think that, yeah, there can be a point where you have to like make your intentions known and actually like, yeah, you want to go on a date or whatever. You have to, be at a point where you can ask that. But I think that there's a struggle point between, okay, we've got this girl to this low pressure context, whether, it's, you're hanging out with your buddies and playing ultimate frisbee or something or whatever, you've got a game night going on, whatever you're doing, and she's coming along to it, it's a low pressure environment, then I don't think the right move is often, hey, can I have your number? Let's go on a date or something. And I think a lot of guys, they just kind of like lose this little piece here. And this is something that RPC has not emphasized, in my opinion, enough. And that is on me as well. But that's where game comes into play. Most of what you read in the other RP subreddits are going to come into a play there in that low pressure environment, because yeah, if you can agree, amplify, you can push, pull, you can, tease them. I think teasing is probably the most underrated mode of flirting, and it tells you a lot about their level of interest. If they're not attracted to you and you tease them and you push it a little bit further than maybe is kind of normal, and they'll typically receive it pretty poorly if they're not interested in you. If they let you get away with it and they continue to play into the tease, that's a good indicator of attraction. And so I think that all of the game theory really applies well there. And after you can kind of feel that out and build some of that attraction, and it does take some time often to feel that out, especially if you're one of those guys who you're not Christian Brad Pitt and you have a little bit of game to run before the girl's kind of sold on you. Yeah, take that time, make sure that you're being interesting, that you are presenting value, that you're pulling away some of that value. How does she respond when you withdraw? Does she follow you? Does she seek you out after the fact? I think that there's a lot of art of the game that isn't really emphasized here, and I think that's where that context comes into play. So I think that's where you can study game ahead of time, try things out. Yeah, you'll crash and burn a bunch, and that's fine. Mitigate, move on, pick up, try again. Maybe not with the same girl because you blew it, but either way, I think that you can learn these game things, these methods and approaches, and you'll get a feel for what works and what doesn't. And when a girl's genuinely attracted to you, they do a lot to tell you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I wouldn't necessarily have missed it. I just didn't emphasize it. Flirting, I don't really have a good, like, me personally, I don't really have a good like recommendation for teasing, or like when it happens, it comes really naturally for me. And if it doesn't happen, it's just like not happening. So I know for myself, I could study game more, study some like pickup videos. A lot of the stuff's already out there. I looked at some stuff here recently. There's a couple, there's one guy, maybe a couple guys I would recommend listening to on YouTube, a guy named Angry Picnic. He's freaking hilarious on his approaches. He just, like, most of its approaches, so maybe not the best for like straight flirting for a set amount of time or anything, but I really got some enjoyment out of his videos and kind of took some of his stuff and tweaked it. And then another guy, Almost Epic, or I think it's Almost Epic, his name's like Carlos in the videos. Those are really good. And then a lot of people have heard of RSD, Real Social Dynamics. Unfortunately, a lot of the all these are secular guys, but the Real Social Dynamics guy, he the main two, I think Max and RSD Max and RSD Tyler, yeah, they actually took a lot of their videos down, like most of their pickup videos, and now they're doing like self-help improvement, like coaching sort of videos. Yeah. So they completely transition. So you'd honestly have to go to probably like a torrent site to find those and download them. I imagine some guy has archived them. And then beyond that, there's a
So
guy.
there's some internet artist that has.
Yeah. There's another guy on YouTube, Tusk, Tusk, like an elephant tusk, and he does pretty all right. But yeah, those are. You guys have any recommendations for either like guys to watch or guides or how to flirt better, how to build game?
So
I'm going to say this. I'm going to say people want to learn techniques, and that's good. And they should learn the principles. They should learn the techniques to a certain degree. But I think where a lot of guys struggle is they're just not comfortable being themselves. They don't really know who they are, and they're not comfortable talking with people of the opposite sex. And one of the things I always recommend to everybody is if you're kind of an introverted person, that's what you need to work on. You need to be comfortable with talking to anybody. One thing that I had a great advantage of growing up was that my parents could turn around in a grocery store line and just start talking to the person behind them like they'd just start up a conversation, never met the person before. And I picked up on that. And so that is one thing that really, really helped me, is just being able to naturally connect with somebody through just an off-the-wall comment. Most people are buried in their phones. Most people are lonely. A lot of people are just lost in their own head. They want that connection. And if you reach out to them, yeah, it may be a little spurgy at first. And there may be some people that you get rejected by. But most of the time, if you're just, and you don't just chat up pretty girls, you chat up everybody. You chat up the old guy, especially where Roosh writes about elderly game, the elderly opener. You just talk with elderly people and you see they're comfortable. They'll talk with anybody. They love to tell stories. They love to talk.
Oh, and they don't give a rip, which is so much fun, because you can learn a lot from the old people who don't give a rip, and they can throw down some pretty hilarious game.
Exactly. And most people have lost that art. And so the first thing is just practice talking to people. You don't have to practice asking girls out if you're really uncomfortable. Just say hi to somebody. Just turn around and, if you see something stupid happen, point it out to the person behind you and you can have a laugh together. It becomes natural after a while. It does take practice, though.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw out a couple things here real quick. So, Patrick, first of all, name of this episode, Geriatric Game Theory. So there you go. Here's a nugget for you.
All right.
So a couple things. There's any type of interaction that you're having with somebody, especially when it comes to a woman that is attractive or you're interested in, there's a couple things happening, right? There is a meta level game that you're playing, and there's also the micro level game. So the meta level game is, what is your status among the group? Specifically, what's your status among the men? She's sizing that up. So you want to have that on lock, especially if you're the one arranging the logistics. You want to make sure that you're doing so in a way that puts you in a favorable position. They're also going to be evaluating what's your status among the women. If you have low status among other women, they're going to be outsourcing their groupthink and figuring, okay, well, they must know something I don't, and so I'm going to downgrade you right there. So manage that as well. Those are kind of the two meta level game going on to go on with. Micro level is her opinion of you personally, and also her opinion of your opinion of her, if that makes sense. So those are the things that she's filtering really on a subconscious level. And so you're kind of playing 4 games at once, and it may seem intimidating, but it really isn't when you get into it. So a couple of things that make this, I think, really easy and kind of a shortcut is if you do your logistics well, you have a good group dynamic, you have guys around you that aren't, putting you down and putting you in like awkward situations and making you low status, that's a plus. And if you have women around who, whether or not you're, just friends with them, or if they're interested in you, better if they're interested in you, because that's going to enhance your status. So it's kind of like you can take care of a lot of those meta variables ahead of time. Then on the micro level, we often say, lift, have good style, like good hygiene, etc. You can do a lot to help your own attractiveness ahead of time. So really you're managing more of that interaction between you and her. And the big thing is are you amusing yourself? Are you having this conversation for your own enjoyment? And I think a lot of times guys are so focused on, oh, is she having a good time? Stop caring about that. It doesn't matter. Like, are you having a good time in the conversation? Because if you have a good enough time in the conversation, if you're amusing yourself by the way you're teasing her or the topics you're talking about, and, sure, maybe she doesn't want to hear about your Gundam collection, but if you're being a normal person and having an amusing conversation and she's along for the ride, she's going to see that as a high status move. And generally, if you can tease her and, you know, have fun and you are amusing yourself, she's going to catch that as well and fall into your frame pretty easily. So I think if you think about some of those things, you may be able to start pinpointing areas where your game is deficit, right? So are you putting yourself in context where you are losing the meta game before you even get into the micro game? Or are you putting yourself in, you know, maybe a bad situation the other way where it's like, yeah, you're among a bunch of people who respect you really well on like the female level, but you're around a bunch of guys who are, you know, fighting for those women attention and like cutting you down. So there might be areas you can think about that you're going to look and say, okay, I need to reevaluate that and come at it a different way.
Yeah, I think that's good. So I think that covers a lot of things for most of the like dating dynamics. And one thing I'll add, I can't remember if I added this in already, but organizing so like low pressure social situations. So for me, I really like game nights. I love playing, you know, board games or cards or whatever, and worship is also really fun. So organizing a weekly or a twice weekly board night or game night / worship night, and using that as like something I can invite.
How does COVID factor into that right now? How do you do that successfully during COVID time?
Well, if
surround yourself by people who aren't stupid and are willing to defy stupid laws.
That's pretty much my
Hasn't
situation.
held me back any.
Amen.
Yeah, the churches that I go to, or there's one church I'm a part of, another church that I go to every once in a while, and both of the churches aren't enforcing the mask thing or like the distance thing. Everybody's pretty much over it where I'm at. So find those people. They're around. There are people still meeting everywhere, whether that's at a church or in small group or I don't know, whatever. But start building those connections, and that's kind of what I want to have us talk about next, is building those social circles, breaking into cliques and things of that nature. Oz, I think you were talking about a little bit more. Why don't you talk about that some more?
So when it comes to developing social circles, cliques, whatever, people, you know, places and things that you're doing that people want to be a part of, and having a social group that's conducive for, one, just having a fun life, and two, being able to invite people along and kind of feel them out in a low pressure situation. I think there's a lot of ways of going about this. This is something that I would consider myself really good at everywhere I've done this pretty naturally. And I think a few of the key things is, first of all, having a place in mind or a context. Like, you have to have like a reason for people to get together. I think barbecues are a really easy one to do. People like food, people like hanging out, and there's really no point or pressure. Nobody's going to feel like, if I'm not good at the game, I'm going to lose or anything like that. So it's probably one of the lowest possible stakes. And so I think if you start at like kind of the lowest possible ask and just get to know more people, like if I were just dropped into a new context and city as a single guy, I would want to just meet new people and start inviting them over in really, really low stakes sort of things. Of course, if I meet we have common interests and we all like games or something, and do that, you can kind of feel them out ahead of time. And then as you get to know this group a little bit better and find out where some of those common interests lie, you can kind of select events that pertain to that. But I think when it comes down to like good hosting is, one, if you can do the hosting, you're going to solve a lot of your logistical problems to begin with. I think if you can find a place to do that, or find a buddy who's willing to do that a lot, and you can play host, even better. Because I think a lot of times people don't do anything because a lot of young single people don't have the room to do it, and they feel like it, wouldn't be fun that way. So having a good place is a great starting point. And then I think choosing the right dynamic of people. I see so many times people try to pull together some sort of social group activity, and they don't even think about how different personalities may clash or different worldviews may clash, and they just end up creating these like bizarre hostile environments or things where people are just really awkward around each other because there's no matching characteristics. If you can get the same group of people together multiple times, you'll have kind of a microculture start to grow, and that can be helpful to a point, but you got to keep it in check, right? So you want to have a little bit of a culture, so when a new person comes, they feel a little bit like the outsider, so they have a little bit of a barrier to cross so they can feel like they belong once they do. If that barrier is too strong, they're probably not going to want to put in the effort to try and climb that barrier. So I think there's kind of a management process where you want to, yes, meet with the same people pretty regularly so you can develop that micro community culture, but not so much so that it becomes cemented and people aren't able to break into it or feel like they can.
Do you think you could give a specific example of that for the audience so it'd help them connect a little better with that? So what does that look like?
Yeah, so I just using like the barbecue example, I was hosting barbecues probably twice a month or something like that with relatively the same people. It would normally turn into like a game night or sitting around the campfire or something like that. And we'd start creating like inside jokes that would just naturally occur. And there'd be certain, activities that would come up regularly. There was certain games that we all played where, we would adopt rules along the way and have house rules that everybody kind of knew. Those type of things are really fun for the people who are involved in that because you feel like you belong. Bringing an outsider into that situation isn't too high stakes. When you start getting into like a Bible study, for example, and you're deep down into a study and you've had a lot of background information and you're using all of that as your platform for doing the next study, somebody could easily feel left behind in that conversation and feel like they're not adequate or able to break through some of those cultural contexts. Or if you've been hanging out with like the same group of 10 people for 10 years, the person who's going to come in there is going to be like, dude, I am not going to make up 10 years of experience with these people in any kind of reasonable time. So this just isn't worth it for me. So I think that you just have to keep bringing in some fresh new blood periodically so that things don't cement too quickly. And then when you're selecting people for this, I think you got to be keeping in mind what other people's like motives are, right? So if you're only bringing along guys that are less attractive than you, and you're trying to bring all the hot girls around, that's not going to go over super well because eventually they're going to figure out the math on that, and it doesn't work out very well. So if you find other dudes that are, at your level or better, great, bring them along. They probably have attractive friends too. So I think as long as your goal here is to provide everyone with value, your own amusement, of course, should be good. And the ability to meet people and get on a really good connection with them is great, not only for meeting people for dating related purposes, but also discipleship. Probably the best discipleship conversations I've ever had with people ended up being a result of these low stakes conversations that started where I got to know them in a way that I probably wouldn't have otherwise if it was a more formal setting.
It's less of a hierarchy where you're inviting people because you're the best at everything and you want to be the top guy. I think some people kind of get in that dynamic. And if you can just kind of be like everybody else and invite people that are maybe a little different, but not that you necessarily have the best in every situation. I think some people do have that tendency. And it just works better if you can realize that if somebody comes and they have some things that are better than you, it's not a challenge. It's something that you can look up to and you can learn from as well. And so not only are you adding value because you've set something up that's cool that other people like and that they're getting interaction and value out of, but that other person brings value and brings something to the table that maybe you don't have or have less of. And so it becomes a value added situation on both sides and you grow as well.
Yeah, I think there's a point though you do have to like be conscientious of the fact that if somebody's coming along and they may be in a lot of ways like demonstrating high value and bringing value to the table, if they don't mesh with the group well, or if there's people that are being rubbed the wrong way who are kind of regulars in the group that you want to continue to have, you got to be ready to like kick that person out or like cut them loose or stop inviting them, because I think there's a certain point in which preserving a good quality of the group is important. I can think of times where I was joining other people's activities for different things, and eventually some guy came along who was just some loudmouth tool, and the person who was organizing this event just kept bringing them along and kept inviting them, and eventually a lot of people, the people that I went there originally because I thought they were cool, stopped going because this guy was such a tool, and the guy who was organizing these things just could not figure out the fact that these other people weren't going to show up if this guy kept showing up, and it totally grenaded the whole thing. So I think you do have to do a little bit of like maintenance and culling of the group. Pruning isn't a bad thing either.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think when it comes down to like picking activities and stuff, it really can be whatever your interests are. But I think that things that get people involved with one another and not just talking, when you actually get to see someone's behavior, can go a long way. Like Levi brought up game nights. I have found that a lot of people can say a lot about themselves, but when they actually have to do something, they tend to reveal a lot about themselves. Like, you can say you're really smart, but if you're playing some sort of social game that requires like problem solving or figuring out a pattern, and you're not very smart, that comes across pretty quickly. So I think that you can find out a lot about a person if you put them in context where what they talk about themselves has to be put into play in some way or another. I guess other tips along the way would be, if you want to make sure that you stand out in the social hierarchy of the group, one, if you're hosting, you are going to stand out pretty much, period. Two, if you choose games that you're bad at, that's not a good idea. So you probably, if you're the one organizing things and getting people together and you suck at blank, don't choose that as the group activity. So you are setting yourself up for failure. That's generally a pretty good idea. And then if you can set yourself in a position where you're like teaching people things, like bring people over. If you're a great cook, hey, I was going to show a buddy how to cook. You should come on over too. We're going to cook up this great meal. In fact, you know, we're going to cook so much food. We should invite some more people along and we can all learn this thing together. Not only are you hosting and you're doing something that you're good at, but also you're putting yourself in a position where you're teaching something to other people, which automatically, you know, sets yourself apart in that situation. So I think you can be creative as to what that may look like, but those are, again, you're really kind of setting yourself up to be in a pretty good position. Then let's say that cute girl that you invited from Sunday morning is along, you know, she's going to be sizing you up at that point, and she's probably going to be receptive of, you know, if you do start teasing her, she likes to, you know, the girl likes to get the attention from the alpha, even if it's kind of that teasing attention. And so I think that's a way that you can kind of take somebody from a high pressure context, put them in a situation where you can get to know them a little bit better at lower stakes, and put yourself in a favorable position where you're stacking the deck in your favor.
On the other hand, if you don't have a lot of experience doing this, don't get in over your head. Don't set yourself up for a situation that you may not be able to handle, because a lot of that sounds really ambitious, but I think a lot of people are gonna not have experience. So it's best to start with what you can handle and build from there. Don't take on too much at the start, or you're gonna find yourself unable to handle it and the whole thing may fall apart. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I actually would say that like hospitality is one of the things the Bible does talk a lot about as far as being a good quality, and actually one of the qualities of being an elder, for example. So it's definitely up there of a list of things that Christians ought to cultivate, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think these are good opportunities to cultivate your ability to be hospitable. And so, you know, there's some good friends of my wife and I who they've begun hosting a lot, which, you know, is great because they have the space for it and we don't at the moment. And so it's been really cool to see, because the first few times I hosted, it was like awkward. It was like they chose music that they liked, but literally no one else liked. And it was like, that makes for kind of a weird party. And, you know, just food choices that were totally strange. And it's been interesting to see kind of the evolution over the last year, and they've become much better at it. And so, you know, yeah, a lot of people coming out the gate, you know, it may come out a little weird to start with, but that's okay. You know, take notes, think about it, and think about what could be done differently. And if you have good friends that are a part of this, you're like, hey, what could have made that party or that event better?
Calibration, definitely.
Yeah, it's a skill like anything else.
Yeah, I think those are really good notes. I don't know if there's too much else to add on building a social circle. I can't think of anything. Can you think of anything, Chuck?
Well, again, risk. All of this involves risk. You need to put yourself out there. You need to make some plans. You need to think of some cool things to do. And then you need to try it out. It's not always going to work out. But if it doesn't work out, hey, you can have a good laugh on it, out of it. You can learn something. And if you've invited cool people, it's still going to kind of work out. Remember, ultimately, if you're not good at doing this stuff, how do you get good at doing it? By doing it and failing and then succeeding and then failing again and succeeding. It takes time and it takes practice. And a lot of people, they want to set up like the perfect thing right from the start. And if it doesn't go perfect, I failed miserably. You know, don't take yourself so seriously. Remember, if we're building relationships, we're trying to connect with other people, not only for Bible study, not only for church, not only to make friends, not only for dating, but we're trying to improve ourselves, and we're trying to create a whole dynamic. And there's a lot of facets to creating a successful social dynamic, and that takes time. So don't be too hard on yourself, but be willing to learn and be observant and look and see when something works and when something doesn't, and just keep trying. A lot of people don't have any experience doing this. They're at home, they're behind a screen 23 hours a day. They don't interact with people very much, especially not right now during COVID, which is why I've asked some of the things I've asked, because it's hard to get out there, especially during COVID, and do some of this stuff. It's going to take some risk. It's going to take some practice, and you're going to have to put yourself out there if this is what you want. But the results can be very much worth it. Oz has obviously been very successful here. Levi, you've had some success. I've had some success as well. It just kind of depends. My dynamic's a little different because I'm a little older, but my wife and I have hosted many times, had people over, and it's gone quite well. When
Yeah.
you've had some time in, it gets to be natural at a certain point and things just kind of flow, but it doesn't get there automatically. It's going to take some time.
Yeah, I will just add to, as far as what the benefits of this are, like there's some pragmatic benefits in that you're expanding your social circle, you're meeting more interesting people, one of which, or, you know, maybe attractive girl that you end up with, whatever. Like there's some obvious pragmatic benefits to this, but this is the kind of stuff that if you do well, not only are you creating memories with great people that you get to enjoy for the rest of your life, but they get that as well. So it's a gift you're giving them. And when I think about some of the fondest memories that I have and some of my friends to collectively have together, we have these touchstone memories we can look back at. Oh yeah, I remember that time that we went all and did this, blank, whatever. And those are like these kind of totems, these pillars in the ground that we can point back to as these great memories together that really helps cement our friendship and kind of create, you know, an ongoing narrative of that group dynamic. And so I think that's some of the richness in life that a lot of people who are living these isolated lives are really missing out on. So even if you're listening to this, you're a married person, you don't care about, you know, finding a spouse or whatever, like do this anyways. It's so enriching and it's so worthwhile. You know, I can't not do it because it's just now part of how I operate, and it's so enriching that way. So I would really advise people to, you know, consider it as something that is a gift you're doing for, yes, yourself, but also for other people, and you're able to provide them with these great memories. And if you create a great group, those things can go on for decades. I mean, there's a lot of people that I and my wife, you know, as we were going through our dating phase and brought these people along and all this, you know, we're still hanging out with in relatively the same group, and it's super rewarding. A couple other things too is if you are a single guy and you're creating these social groups and you're inviting girls along, you're inviting them into your life, and they get to have a really, I guess, upfront preview of what does this guy's leadership look like? What does this guy's friend group look like? And if you have an awesome group of people and you're inviting her along on that journey, that's really attractive. That's something that my wife like noticed really quickly when she met me. Was I was up to interesting things, and she always knew there was an adventure or something interesting going on if she kept hanging out with me. And so it was a pretty natural progression from there. So, you know, that's kind of your opportunity to, you know, we talk in the red pill sphere a lot of time about adopting frame and inviting girls into your frame. Well, this is kind of the substance of your frame. This is where it actually like hits the road and things are happening. Whether it's mission, yes, that's a big part of it, but also who do you hang out with? Who do you spend time with? What are the, you know, things that you are doing for enjoyment? And those things can be very much a benefit to you in terms of, you know, inviting her into your frame if you set those things up well ahead of time.
Great point.
Cool, guys. I think that's a pretty good podcast right there. What do you say?
Yep, geriatric dating theory. Here we go.
You got it.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Don't name it that.
Yeah,
I have it as elderly game theory, dating and social dynamics for the Christian.
Oh boy. We'll have to work on that one.
No, give me. I've got dating and social dynamics and churchianity. What do you guys want to call it?
That sounds better than geriatric game theory. But yes, for anybody still listening to this point, that's an inside joke you get to be a part of. So congratulations.
All right, guys. Until next time, it was great talking with you. Real quick, it's just popped in my head. I'd like to end with a prayer. Are you guys opposed to that?
Of course not.
Go for it.
Fantastic. Father, thank you for this wonderful time. We could just talk together and share our thoughts, Lord. Iron sharpens iron. I thank you that we get to do that. Father, I pray that the guys and some gals listening to this, pray that they would they'd be encouraged, that would change lives, and that because of this podcast, people would be discipled, people would hear the gospel, and your kingdom would be expanded. Pray that you'd help the men listening to this be strong leaders, help them to, or just give them a greater desire to pursue you and your greatness and your mission. I pray that you would press upon them what you want their mission to be, that would also be to, include expanding your kingdom, and ask all these things in the name of your Son. Amen.
Amen.
And
All right, guys.
take it easy, gentlemen.
Love y'all. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care,
Peace.
gentlemen.